In our village, we don't talk much about the past. It's the kind of place where people only remember the good and forget the bad. But there's one story that no one dares to forget. It's about the evil cook, Madam Adiaha. Madam Adiaha was a woman of few words, but many secrets. She wasn't from our village. No one knew where she came from or how she learned to cook the way she did. But when she arrived, it was as if the spirits themselves had sent her. Her meals were legendary. People said one bite of her food could change your life forever. At first, it seemed like a blessing. Adiaha cooked for everyone: weddings, funerals, festivals. Her pots never emptied, and her dishes were so delicious that people would fight over the leftovers. But soon, strange things started happening. People began disappearing. First, it was the village drunk, a man no one cared too much about. Then it was a young girl, barely in her teens. A week later, a hunter went missing after eating a meal at Adiaha's feast. No one connected the dots at first. They just thought the forest had claimed them, as it sometimes did. But the disappearances didn't stop. My grandmother was the first to notice. She was an old woman, but sharp. She had seen things in her time and knew when something wasn't right. One night, she came to me with a warning. "Beware of Adiaha's food," she said, her voice trembling. "There's something wrong with it." I didn't believe her at first. How could I? Adiaha's cooking was incredible, and no one else seemed to have any issues. But then my best friend, Gidi, vanished after attending one of Adiaha's special dinners. That was when I began to take my grandmother seriously. One evening, my curiosity got the better of me. I decided to spy on Adiaha. I didn't have a plan, just the nagging feeling that something evil lurked behind her kind smile. As dusk settled in, I slipped out of my house and made my way toward the outskirts of the village where she lived. Adiaha's house was small, built from mud and thatch, but her kitchen was something else. The moment you stepped close, you could smell the spices, the roasted meats, the simmering broths. It was enough to make your mouth water, even if you weren't hungry. But that night, I was focused. The back of her house had a small window, half covered by a dirty cloth. I crouched low and peered inside. What I saw chilled my blood. In the center of her kitchen was a large, blackened pot. The steam rising from it smelled familiar, like one of the soups she often made. But it wasn't just the pot that scared me, it was the bones. On a long wooden table beside the pot, there were bones. Human bones. I backed away quickly, my heart racing. I wanted to run, but something else caught my eye. In the far corner of the room, I saw a shadow. Someone was lying there, motionless. It was Gidi. He was alive, but barely. His eyes were wide open, staring at nothing, and his skin was pale. I could see the rise and fall of his chest, but there was no life in him. Just an empty shell of the boy I once knew. I couldn't take it anymore. I ran back to my house, my heart pounding in my ears. When I told my grandmother what I had seen, she didn't seem surprised. "She is feeding off us," my grandmother whispered. "The food she makes, it's a curse. She uses it to steal souls. That's why her meals taste so good. They're filled with the life force of others." It sounded impossible, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. The disappearances, the strange behavior of those who ate her food and survived, they were all connected to Adiaha's cooking. And now I know the truth. The next day, I tried to warn the village, but no one would listen. They loved Adiaha too much, and they were too blinded by her food. "You're just jealous," they said. "You're trying to stir trouble." But I couldn't let it go. I knew something had to be done. My grandmother and I began working on a plan to stop her. She knew of an old ritual that could sever Adiaha's connection to the spirits she used to fuel her power. But it wasn't going to be easy. The ritual required something dangerous, Madam Adiaha's own food. We needed to take some of it, mix it with certain herbs, and burn it in a sacred fire. Only then could we break the spell she had over the village. The opportunity came during the village festival. Adiaha, as always, was the one in charge of preparing the feast. The village square was filled with people, laughing, dancing, and eating. I watched from a distance, my eyes fixed on Madam Adiaha as she moved from table to table, serving her food with that same unsettling smile. When she wasn't looking, I snuck into her kitchen. The pot was there, bubbling away, the same as the night before. I filled a small bowl with the soup, careful not to spill any, and rushed back to my grandmother. We worked quickly, grinding the herbs she had gathered into a fine powder and mixing it into the soup. The smell was unbearable, but I didn't care. We lit the sacred fire behind our house, and together we poured the herbal mixture into the flames. For a moment, nothing happened. The fire crackled and hissed, but there was no sign that anything had changed. I began to worry that it hadn't worked, that we had failed. But then the sky darkened, a low rumble echoed across the village, and the wind picked up. The fire roared to life, burning hotter and brighter than I had ever seen. My grandmother grabbed my arm, pulling me away from the flames as the ground beneath us trembled. From the distance, I heard screams. Madam Adiaha's house was in flames. Black smoke billowed into the sky, and the villagers had gathered around, shouting in confusion. I knew they couldn't see what I saw. Madam Adiaha, writhing in pain as the spirits she had bound to her food tore themselves free. Her screams echoed through the night, a sound I'll never forget. When the fire finally died, there was nothing left of her house but ash. The villagers, still confused, tried to make sense of what had happened. Some said it was an accident, others whispered of witchcraft, but no one ever truly knew the truth, except for my grandmother and I. The disappearances stopped after that night. Those who had fallen under Madam Adiaha's spell began to recover, though they were never quite the same. Jide too came back, but he never spoke of what had happened to him. He just smiled a little too much, laughed a little too loud, like someone who had seen things no one should ever see. As for me, I've never touched a drop of anyone else's cooking since. You can call me paranoid, but after what I've seen, I'd rather be safe than sorry. And the next time you sit down to eat a meal prepared by a stranger, maybe you'll think twice before taking that first bite.
I hope you enjoyed the story. If so, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell for more stories like this one. Goodbye.